Okay, let's look at question number 37. So question number 37 is saying the figure shows a food web in a given ecosystem. The figure shows a food web in a given ecosystem. How many herbivores are there in this food web? How many herbivores are there in this food web? Okay, so in this case we are supposed to understand what herbivores are. What are herbivores? Herbivores, these are animals that feed predominantly on vegetation. Herbivores are animals that predominantly feed on vegetation. Herbivores are animals that predominantly feed on vegetation. Now, when they say predominantly feed on vegetation, it simply means these animals they only feed on vegetation. Okay, they do not feed on fresh and vegetation, but only vegetation. Okay, so in this case, we need to identify the number of animals which are feeding predominantly on vegetation. And in this case, the vegetation we have is cabbage. Cabbage, that's the vegetation we have, which is also our producer. Okay, so which animals are predominantly feeding on the cabbage? So the animals which are feeding on the cabbage are grasshopper and rabbit. Grasshopper and rabbit. These are the two animals which are predominantly feeding on vegetation. Rabbit and grasshopper, the only two. So the correct answer for this particular question is B, 2. But you're supposed to be careful. Some of you may even consider human beings. Quite right, human beings are also feeding on cabbage, which is the vegetation. But human beings in this case are omnivores. Human beings are omnivores because they are feeding on both vegetation and flesh. Because human beings are feeding on cabbage, they are also feeding on what? Rabbit. So in this case, we disqualify human beings to be herbivores. Okay, so in this case, human beings are omnivores. Okay, human beings are omnivores because they feed on both vegetation and fresh. Okay, but the question is just saying how many how many herbivores are there in this food web? So there are only two, grasshopper and rabbit. These are the only two animals which are feeding on cabbage only as a vegetation. Okay, so the answer is